My name's Paige Turner. This is The Book Show, and with me in the studio tonight is Shannon Davey. Welcome back, Shannon.
Thanks.
Now, we're talking about your book, Discover the Spirit of Tasmania and Western Civilisation. So far, we've talked about how it looks at the history of Tasmania, it looks at the development of values in our community and our communities more broadly. You've touched on some of the things, some of the through lines that run through the book, and I asked you that unwieldy question, what is the book about? Now, we've been talking about Wesley, and before I really cut into play some music, the Toll Puddle Martyrs and Tasmania. Who were they and what's the connection?
Well, they were 6 Methodist preachers, and they were inspired by Wesley, and Wesley had an interpretation of the Bible which focused on social justice for all people. It was the equality of people. Working class people have rights, human rights, and deserve full dignity, if you like, as much as everyone else. So the Toll Puddle Martyrs formed a union, and they were sent out to Australia. George Lovelace, the leader, was sent to Tasmania. Governor Arthur, initially was put in irons, but Governor Arthur could recognise that he was well educated and a godly man, and put him as stockman on the domain up here. But in England, things, because there was some sympathy with the Methodist ideology, and they weren't seen as rebels at all. They were loyal to the state and not revolutionaries at all, but it sparked popular unionism. There were 100,000 people took to the streets, 800,000 signed a petition, and they had representation in Parliament, and within 3 years, the first time ever, the sentences to Australia were revoked and cut to 3 years. George went back, but he couldn't face the absolute blind hypocrisy, and he went to Canada and spent the rest of his days there. But that sparked British unionism. Unionism became legitimate because it didn't break the law. It was a legitimate way for people to assert their dignity in life, and the unionism sparked the British Labor Party, and that tradition came to Tasmania, and we had the Australian Labor Party, and together with Irish Catholics who had their own perspective and motivation for working class rights as well, they strengthened and provided discipline and moral backbone, if you like, to the labour movement, and they were moderates, so they provided a bulwark against the radical socialism and communist elements. So the gains that brought in Parliament, democratic representation for the wide spectrum of society, and is a big story, a big part of the reason why we've got such an egalitarian society in Australia, debatably the most egalitarian society in the world.
Okay. Do you feel that we have an egalitarian society in Tasmania?
It's not 100%, but compared to other societies around the world and compared to the historical track record, we're pretty blessed.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this being one of the key tenets of the book, I suppose,
yes.
The changes in Tasmania and the influence, the historical influences that have led to this. So moving on from, the arrival of Methodist preachers and the experience of the Toll Puddle Martyrs being in the community as it started to kind of the colonised community as it started to coalesce. You touch on other things like the rise of neoliberalism in the state and a few other things, but in our recent history, what do you feel are the other key influences, or the ones that you've touched on in your book leading to this?
It's following the same theme of the equality of human beings and bringing that forward to the present and the future, present issues, like how we've processed the past and what that looks like now, and looking forward towards the future. I mean, you could summarise those by reconciliation, because within that past that we've got, there is that idea that people are equal, and therefore, and I mean, if you take it right back to Jesus, like, we should be loving each other, blessed are the peacemakers. Really don't need to say anymore, because, I mean, and if we're to be true to the Judeo-Christian background, we're, you know, the peacemakers in political sphere today, there's a lot of traction being made out of tribalism and division and negative culture, and you know, talk about spiritual bloodbath that we've seen in politics. A total abandonment of you know, the principles that have made us a good place.
Yeah. Do you? I mean, I roll my eyes daily hearing about all types of politicians just putting the other ones down. No one looking for that common ground and a way to progress the community. So even considering this, and again, I'm going to use some more rabbit ears in the studio, but these leaders in our community, do you see them as part of the egalitarianism? Do you see it as an aberration? How does that come into the premise of the Spirit of Tasmania as you're talking about it? Or is it just, you know, they're victims of this day and age?
Well, I think there's tensions within liberalism. I mean, the right wing of liberalism is an atheist set of ideas that says that, you know, that capitalism needs to be based on the inequality. Now, I know that there are many liberal-minded people with a Christian ethos that have tapered that seriously and have introduced serious amount of ethics into liberalism. However, you've still got that range, and how that is reconciled. There's the political instinct's a pretty nasty thing, and it leads to tribalism, and just looking at the trust surveys that were done, well, they're regularly done, you know, the amount of trust in politicians and so forth is way down under 20%.
Okay.
So, and there's a lot of division in society. Having said that, I think there's a lot of overlap and commonality and common sense in the centre of politics, where, I mean, debatably, Australia is one of the most harmonious communities in the world.
I have to say, I find that quite terrifying, you know, that I see such little harmony there. But it's also interesting how you're saying you see a lot of areas of overlap, and I suppose what I'm looking at is the areas of conflict, and it's just where we've got our spotlights on towards the community as well.
So we're both at once. So there's tensions. And the way forward out of those tensions, you know, is people with reconciliation at the heart. And I mean, that's obvious with the Aboriginal issue. You know, we've only just begun really to have reconciliation there, and just the peacemaker message, the peacemaking role. It's difficult in the adversarial political bullpit, if you like, because it's the culture is based on adversarial debating. However, there's limits there, and there are lots of really reasonable people in politics who will say things and agree to disagree, and you just sense that there's goodwill behind it, and it's digestible. But the opposite's true as well. I mean, there's some dark forces. It's a black art.
Yeah, that's curious. curious because I often think politicians are not, or there's very few of them who are there for nefarious or personal power reasons.
Yes.
They're there because they want to change society,
yes.
and they're forced into that, into that
yes.
pit, and they have to behave in a
right.
certain way. So, yeah, it's curious. Now we might just jump somewhere else completely different in your book. Like in the very beginning, you start talking about spiritual places or places of spiritual significance. Now this really piqued my interest, and I was having a conversation with an Irish friend today, and and I won't remember the names of the people involved, but there was an old quarry in Ireland, and a new developer came in and wanted to make it I'm simplifying this, wanted to make it a new, big, very profitable quarry that would employ a whole lot of people. But somebody in the community stood up and said, well, this actually is a sacred space. And on those grounds, he took them to court, and he brought, to further his case, he brought Native Americans across to explain what a spiritual space was, and that worked in the Irish court system. And this place was not opened up to business. The spiritual qualities of it were recognised, and I just thought that was an interesting conversation to have, because you talk about spiritual places in Tasmania, and you talk about them from different types, different approaches as well, like Aboriginal spirituality, whitefella spirituality, lots of different. But what can you tell us about these spiritual places in Tasmania?
The part of our identity, every human's identity, is the land and the environment. I mean, it's inescapable. It's a physical and scientific fact that second by second we're breathing air, which relies on plants, which relies on the climate, which relies on the entire universal system to produce the qualities that give us air. So it's part of our life support system, and there's a real ethos in Tasmania of people being connected to the environment, whether it be through fishing or surfing or bushwalking, because it's big medicine. We're very fortunate to have such a potent environment that can, I think I write in there somewhere, that nurtures our soul, and there's lots of people, who just, can nod at that. And so we're very fortunate, and which feeds into our responsibility to look after it. Yes.
And you also, you juxtapose a lot of these places with a suggested meditation. Now, I think, dear listener, you're probably getting a sense of how big this book is in terms of ideas, thinking what we've discussed so far, Shannon, in this discussion. But it's not just a book about, disparities in community or common ground in community. It's about places, spiritual places, and the suggested meditations. Now, you've done some of these very specific to place or very specific to mindset, and I'm hoping you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, well, the first one is just becoming aware of our spiritual support, our life support system, and our relationship with that. And it's just a slow mindfulness, to use your term, about all the variables that go into keeping us alive, and without them we wouldn't be alive. And a sense of appreciation, and and a relationship with that, because it's just really easy to get caught up in the material world and relating to things and people as objects and jobs and money and responsibilities and all that. But so throughout the book there's this opportunity for pilgrimage, like a spiritual journey, and it goes from there to, which is empathy with the Aboriginal people and their families and children, and just what they went through upon white settlement, and just identifying with the way they feel, and through to the how we should process that, and I think I use the word values clarification in there, just to clear. I don't really say much about this or that. It's a journey of personal clarification of values, and at the end of reading the book, there'll be people. No two people will come out the same, and the reaction that I get from different people is really quite different, because everyone's got their own perspective and life experiences going into it, and they come out of it as well. But hopefully there's a process of values clarification that goes on there, and people reflect and think about their own journey in life.
All right. So I'm curious to come back to this notion of a spiritual pilgrimage in Tasmania, but